Hey everyone, it's welcome back to Devs in the Shed. It's been a really long time since we've been online. There's been a bunch of changes that have been happening, but we're super happy to be back. My co-host here is Matt, but today we've got a bunch of people from the Flutter and Amplify teams at AWS that have come in to talk about a whole bunch of new releases that have come out surrounding Flutter and Amplify. So we've got Dylan, Abdallah, and Ashish here today. Let's just welcome everybody here, and maybe we'll start with Dylan. Give us a bit of an intro of who you are.
Hey, absolutely. My name is Dylan. I'm a software engineer here, and I'm the developer on the Amplify Flutter team.
Awesome. I'll go next. My name's Abdallah, and I'm a product manager on the AWS Amplify team, specifically responsible for the Amplify, Flutter, and JavaScript libraries.
Hey, I'm Ashish. I'm a software development manager on the Amplify, Flutter, and JavaScript teams. Excited to be here on the stream again.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Maybe who wants to give the biggest announcement? So who wants to do that? Would that be you, Dylan, that wants to announce what the biggest feature that went GA just in the recent weeks is, and talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, be happy to. So we at Amplify Flutter have historically worked on both iOS and Android, which Flutter primarily supported for the longest time. And over the past couple of years, Flutter has released support for new platforms like web and desktop platforms. And so we've undertaken the big challenge of rewriting our code, which wrapped the iOS and Android native code. And we've instead rewritten it purely in Dart so that we can now and we're going GA to all these new platforms that Flutter itself supports. So we're really excited for that.
Excellent. And what I might do is actually I'll share with everyone in the audience so you can have a look at the announcement itself. I think this is pretty awesome because from my perspective, I've really enjoyed using Flutter, and I had actually poked my head out of Android and iOS, and I'd started doing things in web and desktop. And for Amplify to have this functionality really lets Paul and I kind of play with some of the ideas that we've had, lately. We can show you a little bit of the start of the ideas towards the end of our session. We'll be live for about an hour. But yeah, I'm literally so excited for this particular release. But I know it was a lot of hard work from the Amplify team side, right? It's not just like flicking on a switch and suddenly you've got web and you've got desktop. You guys almost re-architected a ton of the work that you'd already done to kind of bring in that multi-platform support, right?
Yeah, we had to start from close to zero when we went and rewrote this. Yeah. We needed everything that we were relying on previously from other teams. We had to basically build from the ground up ourselves. So it took us about 2 years to fully do it, and we're just at the tail end of that now. So it's been a long journey, but it's been rewarding too.
Cool, I think the Flutter support was, starting to get requested by customers back in 2018. And that was really early for us here. At that time, Amplify didn't have support even for mobile frameworks. It was just web through JavaScript. And I think once we had support for iOS and Android through, the native libraries, we looked into building plugins for Flutter because there's no official Dart SDK even till today. So, that was the best way to get to market at that time. And since Flutter was only supported stable on iOS and Android, it was, kind of the best approach and allowed us to accelerate a lot because we didn't have to build a lot of the low-level functionality. We're just kind of wrapping that in Dart using the plugin architecture. But definitely there was this crossroads we reached at some point after that went GA when we were looking into multi-platform support. Should we wrap the JavaScript library and bring web support as well? Or should we go the Dart route? Because there was a significant upfront cost there to go Dart first. And we did a lot of proof of concepts and evaluations, and ultimately decided let's optimize for the long term because that's the direction where the Flutter team was going. And if we truly want to be scalable when we talk about every single platform that Flutter supports, then we have to take an approach that's not one platform at a time. So I think the call was definitely the right one based on feedback from customers right now.
Is there anything that you can kind of share at a very high level in the secret sauce? Because one of the things from my point of view as a developer is it's super hard to support things multi-platform, right? And we're not just talking about the work that you've done with Flutter going GA for web and desktop, and the work that you've done with iOS and Android, but we're also talking about like having Amplify be a consistent platform around native iOS, native Androids, React Native, Svelte, Vue, Next.js, all these different JavaScript frameworks that are coming out as well. Like, is there anything at a high level you can share around the secret sauce that allows you to kind of pull in that like consistent experience regardless of the platform?
Abdallah, take it.
I think like what I want to say about a secret sauce, there really isn't a secret sauce. We are open source, first of all. So all of our libraries are actually available for you to be able to explore, to be able to contribute to be able to really understand more about how our libraries are structured. In terms of keeping our platforms at parity is definitely challenging. It definitely requires a lot of internal coordination just to make sure that we're always on the same page, that we're exposing interfaces that are coherent, and we're getting our features at parity across, whether it is web or mobile native or cross-platform with Flutter, to be consistent. And there's always a little bit of a battle that we play about like different audiences needing different types of features. So it's a lot of internal coordination and conversations.
So it's not like cheating like JSII for CDK, where you can code it in TypeScript and it just magically transpiles it across. Like, it's all handcrafted, all original for each language, which probably means it's probably a better experience overall. Just more grunt work getting out there and coding it multiple different times.
Well, it also means when you invest in a platform, you have to invest in a team. It's probably the other thing that I come to think about in that model. For everyone that's just joined, we were having problems connecting into AWS Twitch. Thanks for joining in. Let us know where you're from. It looks like we are working. Let us know in the chat if we are now live on the AWS Twitch side. But
it's definitely live, yeah.
Yep. From the devs in the sheds, Paul and myself, we've brought the Amplify team in to talk about the Flutter GA for web and desktop support, and we're going to go through a ton of other stuff that's happening in the Flutter space and show some cross-platform apps and the likes. So hopefully that's exciting for everyone. I'm really excited to be with the Amplify team today. I am going to quickly just share the announcement as well. Like, I know I've posted the link to everyone, but I'll just put it up on the screen as well. So this is the announcement for Flutter going GA for web and desktop. You can see a little bit around what the experience looks like. There is an example app that you can see. But one of the things that I did kind of want to lead the conversation down is outside of the architecture that's kind of crazily awesome to get these things working. The Amplify teams also got really good getting started steps that make it really easy for developers. But it kind of makes me think it's probably worth spending a little bit of time on just what is Amplify and the capabilities as well, right? Because like when I look at it, we have a lot of things that come into play on all the different platforms. We have, in the library side, we have a CLI, we have Studio, we have hosting. There's a crazy amount of stuff. We have a UI library as well. There's a crazy amount of stuff that kind of comes into the picture that can kind of make developers' jobs a lot easier. I guess what's the best way to kind of explain someone that's new and coming in for the first time?
I can take that. So AWS Amplify is like a complete solution that lets front-end web and mobile developers quickly and easily build, ship, and host their full stack applications on AWS. And it's pretty flexible for you to kind of leverage the breadth of AWS services as your use cases evolve as well. So I think a logical way to explain it would be to kind of talk about the different steps in the life cycle of application development. So there would be like the step of like creating your backend. So for that, Amplify offers Amplify Studio, which is like a visual interface that allows you to build and deploy your full stack app. This also includes building your front end UI, but also kind of create and model your stuff for your data use cases, or authenticate and manage your users, those kind of things. So that's Amplify Studio. We also have the Amplify CLI, which is like a tool chain to allow you to create, configure, and manage your app backend as well. So it's, you can kind of pick and choose. They're both different approaches to accomplish the same thing. But that's what we have in terms of creating, configuring, deploying your backend. And then there's a step where, as an application developer, you want to connect your front-end app to these AWS services, right? So for that, we have a bunch of open source libraries and UI components, like you mentioned there. So for libraries, we have these high-level decorative APIs, which are more use case specific to kind of make them more intuitive. So like the APIs would be closer to like auth.sign-in rather than specific to the AWS service that lies underneath there. And then we have UI components that make it even easier for you to kind of get started. So for example, the authenticator UI component is just like a drop-in component that allows you to get started with your login flows in a matter of minutes. So that's what we have in the realm of connecting your application to the backend. And then the last phase would be deploying or hosting your application. So Amplify offers hosting support as well, which allows for fully managed CI/CD for both static and server-side rendered web apps. So like quite an extensive set of capabilities right now. But one important thing to note is like all of these things work really well together depending on, if you're just starting your application, you may want to start with Amplify Studio or CLI to kind of set up your app backend and then integrate with the libraries, UI, and all of that. But you can also use each of these components individually or a la carte as you want to. So if you already have like a backend deployed, you can still integrate with it with the libraries, for example. So it's kind of flexible in that way.
I think one of the things you showed through, like there was a comment saying great content. Now that could be completely irrelevant, but it triggered me to think about where we've come with Amplify in regards to the docs. Like the docs have come a really long way. Like now we have a central place where all these features are. You can walk through, you can see code examples. It visually looks really good, and you've got this tie-in all together. So it really feels like Amplify's come a long way by bringing together all the docs and all the different pieces. It feels like worlds apart from where it was a couple of years ago. So it's really great to see that.
That's awesome to hear. And that's one of our biggest areas of focus this year is making our documentation even better. Like I think that's constantly what we hear from our developers that use Amplify is we think your docs are good, but we want more. We want clear information about the use cases we can build. We want better sample apps that we could use to help us understand how to build with best practices. And then we just want to be able to understand how can we actually take everything that Amplify offers, and then how do I actually structure my application in a way that helps me scale. So all those are all pieces of feedback that we're getting from the community, and we're definitely a huge area of focus for us is making documentation even clearer and a lot more streamlined this year.
And I think you've got some secret sauce there as well, right? Like talking about the multi-platform secret sauce. I'm pretty sure like about 6 months to a year ago, you hired one of the best developer documentation people in the world for Amplify, and she's slowly starting to make a dent for all this stuff as well, which is why we've kind of seen such a huge uplift in the documentation getting started. Like from Paul and my perspective, as we work with customers, like on some things that they're building with Amplify in particular, there's just so many different ways to build an app, right? Like someone would come to us and say, like, we've got all this stuff in CDK, like, but we want to use that in Amplify. How do we kind of like bring that into Amplify? And then now there's documentation section, there's mechanisms that's built to support CDK. I know there was a huge amount of investment in kind of reworking like in-app messaging as well recently too, and like the documentation has vastly improved for that as well. In the older version of in-app messaging, it was simply just like one page, here you go. Whereas I guess all the little bits and pieces that you might have that you might get stuck as a developer because it's like your use case is slightly different from the golden pathway or the perfect pathway or flow. The documentation is kind of being built out to show people the flexibility that you have with Amplify and how you'd use it in slightly different ways to kind of solve slightly different use cases. Another good way that I can think about it is actually if you go into the Swift side, you've got async versus sync support. And a lot of people originally asked for like, hey, like a lot of my code's asynchronous, like I need to use completely different libraries and capabilities to do this. What does that look like for me? And even though they could have done it themselves pretty easily, having that documentation there just makes it a real breeze to kind of implement.
Right.
Yeah.
Just want to add one thing since you asked about the secret sauce across both docs and multi-platform. So I just say a couple of things. One is that, first of all, having this stuff be open source really helps us be customer obsessed. Like there's a lot of transparency into what customers want, and it's easy to gather that data and for us to focus on making those improvements. So a lot of iterative improvements have come through that way. And the other thing is like mechanisms. I would say like we've definitely employed a lot of those into bringing consistency across docs, the way the use cases and stuff are in the libraries or any other part of the product, but also making sure to not get that consistency at the cost of developer experience or familiarity with that particular platform. So it's definitely like we have API reviews, for example, which make sure like we start with a list of use cases, and then we determine what the best DX is to achieve that per platform, and then we go ahead and like build that in. So like these kind of really help you achieve that multi-platform support. And I would say it's not a one size fits all thing. It's more like case by case. But yeah, mechanisms definitely help, and open source has been a really great way for us to kind of determine where to invest and deliver the things that customers want.
Yeah, and it's been really good as well. I have done some pull requests into the documentation, as well as some of the different Amplify libraries as well at certain times. So that is a really good way that the community can kind of shape what they want out of Amplify and bring things in. I think the biggest contribution that I actually saw was, it's a bit of a shout out. There's someone actually like brought in all the elemental video stuff into Amplify as a plugin, right? And at the time, I needed a solution like that to solve a particular customer problem. And I was like, hey, I don't find it in the libraries, I don't find it in the documentation. And then I saw the extensibility capability. Someone had just done all the heavy lifting for me, and I just called their code in like 2 lines, and then I had it live. It's pretty awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah, we're always constantly surprised about how excited the open source community is about contributing to all of Amplify, like all of the help that we get on making our documentation better, calling out where there are gaps, and then also contributing to features. And the more that we put out information that makes it clear about what it is that we're working on, the more that we see that contribution increases substantially. So it gives us like really a lot of confidence that we're focusing on the right things and that we're addressing the right pain points. So it's awesome to work on something like this, especially being a part of such a big company as AWS, to be so in touch with your customers and so close to them this way. It's really a blessing, honestly, for us.
Yeah, definitely. Even the Flutter library itself was, I think, the most upvoted feature request on the Amplify JS repo at the time, because there was an Amplify Flutter, in 2018. And then web and desktop support, which we're talking about today, like that was the #1 feature request on the Flutter repo, right after we went GA. So like definitely it's been, great for us to kind of determine where to invest and, like determine our roadmaps and stuff as well.
Nice. Well, I think it's I think the audience and let us know in the audience if I'm wrong, but I think yeah, I think it's let's have a look at a demo. I want to see some things running on different platforms. I want to see what this cool feature looks like with Flutter, where we've got web and desktop and an app support. Do you have anything that you can show?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
So I actually want to show the same application that we have in our release as blog as well, that talks about this is just our announcement, and then how to use different what we call categories of Amplify. So I can walk you through how you can add authentication plus API features plus storage as well, and how you can use all of these categories together with Amplify.
Let us know when you're ready to share your screen, Abdallah, and I'll put that up so everyone can see it.
Awesome. I need one moment. I am ready now.
Cool. Bringing it up. Oh.
There you go. Yeah, Paul and I fighting over the controls. Okay.
Yep, you're ready there. We've got you up, so your screen is live now.
Awesome. So what you see here in front of you is the first screen that you see after you log into the application that I've built with Amplify Flutter. So if I log out here, what you see here in this screen to the right is my application running on a browser. And the same application using the exact same code base is running as well on an iOS emulator simulator and an Android emulator. So I have all of those running at the same time. So what I can do
No,
here,
this is probably like just a really good, like a really good trigger to people that may not have worked with Flutter. So Flutter, like, you know, we knew that with Flutter, like when it first came out, it was specifically to building like, you know, phones and devices. But there's the introduction of like being web enabled, right? So now you're building in, you're writing your code in Dart, and it's exactly the same across all 3 devices.
exactly right. And we've made sure to build our library in such a way that minimizes the need for you to have to implement any platform-specific logic. We abstract all of that away for you, give you a single interface that you can use when interacting with Amplify, so that it really, truly allows you to completely immerse yourself in building the features that you need and targeting the platforms that your end users need without having to worry about platform discrepancies.
Yeah, and just to be clear, like there are actually 6 platforms that are supported as part of this release. So it's like iOS and Android for mobile, web, and then for desktop, it's macOS, Windows, and Linux. So it's like that's the largest number of platforms we support here at Amplify. So it's really exciting for us as well.
Yeah, so to move forward with the demo, so what you're seeing here on this webpage that I have all the way to the right is actually what we call our connected UI component, the authenticator connected UI component. And with this authenticator, what we try to do for all of our developers is give you a component that you can drop into your application with only 3 lines of code that handles all of the operations around sign in and sign up for you. That is also very customizable. So we give you the ability for you to be able to get started quickly with building the features that are really truly the differentiators of your application, but then we still take the burden of building that initial login and authentication piece out of the way for you so that you can focus on that. So if you can see here, I've already previously created an account. And if I try to log in now, everything around handling the login and then routing me to a page after login and then handling the state of my login so that I'm redirected back to the authenticator's main page is all handled by that connected UI component. So all of those tasks that you have to do as you're building that initial authentication experience is also just handled for you. And as you can see here, the data that I'm getting back in this homepage is using our API category. And we use GraphQL API under the hood. So you are able to interact with that using the clients that we provide you. And you're able to see here that I have exactly the same data across all of these platforms. And what I can do now is I can actually delete one of those items in here. And then if I refresh, then you can see here that that data is reflected across all of the devices that I have as well, because I'm using the same exact user and they're logged in on all of those devices. I can make this even better, and I can use, with GraphQL API, we have a subscription feature, which uses WebSockets behind the scenes. So then you could listen in for any updates and changes that happen to your data. So when, for example, I delete this entry in one of the devices, then it is reflected automatically in all of the devices without having to actually refresh that screen. But for the purposes of keeping this demo simple, I did not actually implement that feature. So what I can do here with this application as well is I can go to any of those screens and I can click on creating a new budget entry. So this is a budget tracker application that I've created. And I can create here a new budget entry that says, let's say, waterfall, which doesn't make any sense. But the only reason I'm doing that is because I only have waterfall images that are available in my device. So I could click on it, assuming I can actually buy a waterfall, which maybe one day. And then I can click on create budget entry, which is now creates the budget entry, adds it to my list here in the homepage, and then updates the total budget that I have here at the top of the screen. And what you see here when I've actually then I click into that entry again, then I get that same picture that I've uploaded. And this upload feature is using our storage category, and we're uploading these images to S3. And with this application, I've been able to show you 3 things, like how to use our authentication category, completely abstracted away using the authenticator, You're also using the GraphQL API category to be able to handle saving, retrieving data, updating data. And I'm also using our storage category to be able to upload images and then be able to serve them back to the front end. And all of this works seamlessly across all of the platforms that we support.
Very cool. Let's have a little bit of a redirect for a second. I saw that we had DevOps guy asking about more information on the API integration. So I kind of always get confused with this, right? Because I'm kind of like, API integration as in hooking up something with API Gateway and Lambda or Fargate behind the scenes, or using AppSync. So let us know in the chat exactly kind of what you were looking at. But it's really easy to basically call different APIs or use AppSync and API Gateway in some backend that you've created with Amplify, right? You talked a little bit about it as you were kind of doing the demo, and that all that capability is there within Flutter as well with the Amplify support.
Yeah, once we go into the code, it'll be really good to show like the code around those direct interactions. Like as someone that's built, plenty of websites and apps, login, authentication, moving the person around, understanding like continuing the state of that person, then using the identity of that person to be able to make those requests, such as like uploading to S3, like that's a lot of boilerplate code that you have to do. So having pre-built modules to do that to your point are highly customizable means no one knows that you haven't written that code, but because you've saved all of that time and you've been able to make it look and feel exactly the way you want it and expect it to operate within your application.
Yeah, absolutely.
And DevOps guy said, yes, API Gateway. So there's some interest around like what that would look like to make those backend calls.
Maybe actually let's finish the demo, and then just before we get to kind of like the code side of the demo, maybe let's just bring up the docs and talk a little bit about API Gateway. I feel like it might need its own 2 or 3 minutes to kind of cover. But yeah, no, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So we in terms of the API features that I have in this demo here, I'm definitely using GraphQL API that's powered by AppSync. So that's almost our recommended approach. We have a very, very close integration that's set up between us and between Amplify and AppSync. And the reason why we do that is because with GraphQL API, we have a lot of powerful features around authorization rules that are very granular. So you can set that up. You model your data. You create your data schema that you need. And then you're able to add authorization methods either at what we call the model level, or you can even set those authorization modes at the field level to granularly control access to your data. And that plays very well with our authentication category as well. So if you're using both authentication and GraphQL API, then you get that out of the box with Amplify, and we're able to provide you with the power to be able to do all of that very, very seamlessly and easily. And I can walk you through the code to explain a little bit more about how that works. And to address one of the questions that's in the comments around releasing a Zero to Hero course. So we are actually working on releasing a course like that in our Learn site for Amplify Flutter. We already have a course right now for React, and we have a course for mobile as well. So we're working right now on introducing a course for Flutter, just to make it really easy for Flutter developers to understand the full picture of how to build a full stack application with AWS Amplify.
No, that's very cool. I think I'm doing some stuff in that space as well. For Code Catalyst and the like. Paul and I are actually working on a little Zero to Hero for enterprise, I'd call it, where we bring in all the enterprise build capabilities into an app that we've built with Flutter, and that can be set up as a template and a workflow. So that's something that we are working on behind the scenes too. So I think great to see that we're going to have content from both sides. But I'm also acutely aware that if you go on my personal YouTube, like I've got one video that's on 2 videos on Flutter, maybe actually, and they're all both like 2 years ago. And to date, I'm still getting like a couple of 100 views every month on them, even though they're totally broken and don't work. So I'm like, I need to really just pull them and do some stuff now that we've got multi-platform support. I need to pull those videos and put something new on to help everyone too. So
yeah, a lot of
stuff for everyone. Yeah.
So much has changed in the Flutter landscape, and now it feels like it's pretty comfortable to work with without having these big breaking changes and challenges every time you upgrade.
Yeah, I think my stuff was like before null safety, right? So null safety became a big thing. My stuff was definitely before multi-platform support. It was basically like iOS, like in the Flutter 1 days. And now I think like, there was a couple of announcements like in the last couple of weeks. Flutter's at like 2.7, nearly 3.0. Dart as a language just broke to 3.0 in the last week. So it's a really exciting space if you're developing apps that need to work across platforms. It's probably the first solution we've had in a long time. I think back to we've had React Native, right? Like 100% awesome. Love React Native. It doesn't have the same level of multi-platform support. You end up using trying to think of the name, but you end up using Electron and others to kind of work on different platforms. But then way back in the day when I was first developing mobile apps, like the only solution we actually had was PhoneGap, which is basically a website wrapped into an app, right? And a few other solutions that were kind of similar to that. Yeah. So it's pretty awesome to be a web dev / mobile and desktop dev now.
So speaking of code, let's bring up some of that code, Abdallah, and give us a bit of a code walkthrough.
Absolutely. So what you do when you start with building an Amplify Flutter app is...
Maybe if we can make that a bit bigger, like make your screen, because it's a bit hard to see the IDE.
Is this better?
Yep. I think that's good.
You could probably close the console as well, I guess. That's helpful.
Cool. All right, so the first thing that you do when you're using Amplify Flutter is you add the dependencies that you need in your application. And that's exactly what I did here. So what I've added here are the Amplify API package, the Auth Cognito package. So our primary provider for authentication is Amazon Cognito. I've also added the Authenticator connected UI component, our core Amplify Flutter package, and then also our storage package, which primarily uses S3. And after I add these dependencies and install them from my Flutter application, I've already used the Amplify CLI to initialize all of the backend resources that I need. And in order to prove that, I already have the Amplify Flutter, the Amplify project initiated. So I can do Amplify status. And if I do Amplify status, then I'll actually be able to see all of the resources that I have set up, which I do. I have API, auth, and storage available. So now, if I go to my main to my main.dart file, which is the entry file to your Flutter app, what you'll see here is what I've done here is I've configured first Amplify. And when I configure Amplify, what I'm doing is I'm configuring the categories that I want to use with my application. And then after I configure it, now I'm actually wrapping the material app, which is the first widget that loads when your app starts, with the Authenticator connected UI component. And the reason why we do that is because then after the login is complete, the child of the Authenticator is where your user gets redirected to. And we maintain the state of that authenticated user. And when you actually have your user log out of their current session, then what ends up happening is that we redirect the user back to the main authenticator page. So all of that gets handled for you. And it literally takes you almost 5 lines of code for you to be able to add the authenticator to your application. And we already handle all of that for you. And what's really great about the authenticator is that it's actually built completely using material widgets, which means it respects the material app's theme providers or theme builder. So you can basically, as you make updates to your theme with Flutter, that automatically gets reflected on the authenticator as well. So you can fully customize the design from there. And then we also provide documentation about how you can completely customize the complete look and feel of the sign-in and sign-up forms and completely change that design if you need to. For example, add logos or add additional text if you need, for example, to the authenticator. So to walk you deeper into what's happening within the application, now so what happens here is that I'm using GoRouter to control routing within the application. So if I go to my main route that I get redirected to, the main route takes me to this homepage widget, which is the main screen that you see right after you log in, which is here. And within here, at the top here, I have this total budget, which basically is a function that grabs all of the items that I've retrieved using GraphQL API and then sums up the total amount that I have for any of these items. And then in terms of actually grabbing these budget entries, I'm using here what we call the model helpers, which uses GraphQL API. And it uses a code gen that we've created behind the scenes using the data model that I've created, and allows me to then query data that I can then present here in the homepage. And to show you a little bit more about how I've actually set that up, so within the Amplify folder that gets created for you, after you initialize the Amplify project using the CLI, within this Amplify backend API folder, there's this schema.graphql file. And in this file, I have a data schema that I've created for the budget entries that I'm using in my application. And what you can see here is that we use what we call here directives to allow us to be able to configure how this model is going to work. And I have this auth directive here with a rule of allow owner, which basically means that now whenever a user creates any budget entry, they are assigned as the owner of that budget entry, and they're the only person that is able to make any changes to that budget entry. So if I log out of this user, for example, and I go to another user and I create another budget entry, I don't have access to that information. And these authorization rules are really powerful. So you can have authorization rules that are at the model level, like I mentioned, but you can also have authorization rules at the individual field level in order for you to be able to more granularly control access to that data.
Abdallah, when you've got that mechanism that determines only that owner is able to see that data, that then obviously the Amplify project is then packaging that up and storing the owner against the record at the backend data where the data is being housed from. So it and I assume in this example here, is that DynamoDB in this example?
Exactly right. Yes.
Yeah.
Right now, our default data source that we have all of our data go to after you use our GraphQL API interfaces is DynamoDB. That's correct.
Yep, but that could be any number of things, right? Like I think DynamoDB is really easy to quickly get started with Amplify. It's the default that you can go live with. But I've also seen people that have used Aurora RDS. I've seen people use what was it? I'm trying to think. So what is it? What is it? I'm mind blanked, but I've seen a ton of different AWS. There's 20 of them, right? 20 or so different AWS databases.
Absolutely.
That you can kind of connect into and integrate with. Yeah, Redis. I'm thinking of the open search type one. Yeah.
It's like helping you do that. Like select my entries where I am the owner, without having to specifically define and put in extra columns for the owner. Like you're implicitly saying, make sure that we put an owner assigned to these specific records.
Yeah,
that's exactly right. Yeah, and we do handle behind the scenes creating an owner field and doing that and assigning that owner. So then when you're using our API interfaces and you're saying, get me all of the records that are specific to just this user, that happens for you by default, which is exactly what's happening here. So if I go to the query that I'm using in order for me to be able to get back a list of all of the budget entries, then I'm only getting back the budget entries that are relative to the specific user that is logged in.
Yeah. One of the other really cool features, just to call out, is I have seen a lot of people who use AppSync for chaining data sources together, and I've done that personally too, right? So I've kind of collected a lot of information from Dynamo, but I've got an old database that's sitting around that I need to access to pull some elements as well. So you can actually write some JavaScript code in AppSync to pull multiple data sources together, and then all the fetching is done on the AppSync server side, and you can even have caching like Redis done on the AppSync server side with DynamoDB as well. It's like a side note, but all that fetching heavy lifting is like done in the back end, and then I, as a developer that's working on the front end, I just need to worry about defining what my data should look like that comes in, right? And I just get that data back rather than everything that comes down in the multiple APIs that I normally have to chain through.
And one of our bigger areas of focus this year is allowing you to seamlessly be able to use SQL data sources with our GraphQL API category, just to make that a lot easier. Because yes, you can technically right now set up the necessary infrastructure to allow you to do that right now. It just requires a lot of a deeper understanding of how AppSync works, how AppSync resolvers work, and how to set all of that infrastructure up. But we're thinking of ways to make that a lot simpler for you, for you to be able to actually point at the database that you have. And then from that, we would be able to generate all of the necessary information, like your data schema, and then you would be able to layer in on top of that the authorization rules that you need. And we already have an RFC out that talks about the approach that we're thinking about, and I'll link to that RFC just so that if you have any feedback, we would love to hear it.
There's also like a lot more you can do with the way you want to, model your data, authorization rules, relationships between the models, and all of that, which you can do visually in Studio as well. Like if you want to link that for customers, like you don't even have to kind of define it in the schema file. You can just do it visually, and then it'll kind of deploy for you directly all the GraphQL stuff that, and you can test it out even without actually deploying the backend, and just, test it locally as well. So,
and Ashish, is that bi-directional? So you can explore and set up within the UI, but you can then go ahead and publish that out as your definition file, or your schema file for the model. But you can also change your model file and then re-import that as well. Like it's bi-directional, right?
I believe so, yes. I've definitely done it from Studio and then imported it from the CLI. Not done it the reverse way, but I think so. Maybe Dylan Abdallah can correct me if I'm wrong.
Dylan, that was you. Did you? I don't know if you were on mute there, but
sorry. Yeah, I think what you said was correct.
And kind of going back to DevOps Guy, so this is kind of what I was thinking of. Here's just a quick link for you to take a look at too. I might just quickly share my screen. Let me get that up for you. Where is my browser? Here we go. So if you're actually looking at AppSync instead of API Gateway, AppSync does use Redis behind the scenes for caching compression out of the box. And so AppSync can kind of act as the front-end cache to your different data sources. So you can see it actually describes Elasticache for Redis being the component that AppSync can use. But I also know, if you use Dynamo, etc., you do get Dynamo DB functionality around caching if you want to use that too. So there's quite a few options, but the other one is
different layers, right? Like any one of these, or something like DAX, right? You turn that on, and you've sort of you can potentially limit your additional coding required to put in something like Redis where it makes sense. So there's so many ways to be able to implement caching for every single scenario, and starting with these ways is probably the easiest way that's going to solve a good percentage of your challenges around caching.
Yeah, and this is the other article if you wanted to bring your own database, including Redis, that's worth having a look at as well. It was written a few years ago, but we've refined it a number of times actually, and now we've got OpenSearch mentioned. That's what I was trying to think of before, but it kind of goes through how you bring in other databases and how you can have caching set up in front of those databases too. So this article is a really good spot, and I think there's 2 or 3 other blogs that kind of extend off of this too. The other thing that I did want to quickly touch on is if I go to docs to the Amplify, if I go here and we go into Flutter and we go into libraries, we've talked a lot about GraphQL, and it is a super nice solution as a developer where you can have everything brought to you, but you can have authentication brought in through Cognito or other sources really easily. API Gateway is very similar in the approach with Amplify, right? So You do Amplify Add API for Flutter. You'd walk through the steps of like setting up what you've got for your API endpoint. You can bring your own Lambda that might be attached to this, that might talk to other data sources or whatever it is that you're building in the backend. If you're talking to containers, it's all up to you. Bring in that API library that we're showing off beforehand. You do the initialization of Amplify, so it kind of points you through this here. And then there's examples of like making post requests. So very easily you can talk to an API gateway that you've set up from scratch using the Amplify CLI. But because Amplify is so flexible, you also have guides where, if I can find it here, and this is...
You're looking for custom resources, probably?
Yeah, custom resources. I'm like, where is it?
Custom AWS resources. It's a little
there we go. So like a lot of the time, like Paul and myself have built stuff in our accounts with CDK first up. And so we always tend to rely on CDK custom resources, bringing them into our Amplify project. So that's where you've already got an API gateway. You can basically bring that in and start to reference it within your Amplify project pretty easily. There's ways to do that with CloudFormation as well. There's also ways of changing the Amplify configure command as well to kind of point to assets a bit more statically. So again, like the one thing that I really appreciate is like Amplify brings a lot to the table in terms of like helping you work as a developer, but it's also like quite flexible in its approach of like how you engage and interact with different AWS resources.
Wow, it almost feels like you're a part of the team, Matt.
I just use it a ton. Yeah,
I mean, we could tell.
Yeah, Matt's the Amplify's #1 advocate, I think.
In Australia, it seems. Yeah, everything that comes up in Australia comes my way generally from the different AWS folks. So we've kind of walked through the code. I'm trying to think of what we want to cover next. We've only got like 12 minutes before we've got to end the stream.
Let's talk about what's next.
Yeah, let's go to what's next. I was going to propose that. Yeah. So what is next?
Yeah, so we have a lot in store for Amplify Flutter developers. So one of the things that we're keeping a really close eye out on is we're seeing a big trend and a lot of desire for developers to build full stack applications completely using Dart, which include both their front end and back end. So there's a couple of things that we're doing there. The first one is we're exploring right now enabling and supporting a Dart runtime for Lambda, so that if a developer wants to use Lambda to be able to deploy Dart code and be able to run it in the cloud using AWS, that you'd be able to do that and that AWS would support that natively. The other thing, which is exciting, is we're also exploring creating an AWS SDK for Dart so that you're able to talk directly to any of the AWS services that we have available using the AWS SDK, and to be able to build any type of feature that you want using the AWS services as a building block for you. So those are two things that we're keeping a very close eye on, that we're doing a lot of exploration on right now. We're actually going to be putting out an RFC soon on the GitHub Flutter, on the Amplify Flutter repo, to be able to get a little bit more feedback from the community, just to make sure that we're building for the right use cases first.
Just to mention a little bit on the Dart SDK, like this is related to like how we got to multi-platform support from the plugins to the pure Dart approach. Basically, like we had to, since there wasn't an official AWS SDK for Dart, we had to build this internally ourselves for the subset of services that Amplify, solves for, through the different categories we support. So we already see customers using some of that. That's already internal and open source. And we published Signer as well, which Dylan can talk a little bit more about. We're also seeing customers use that. So there's a lot of signal that, we should kind of expand the support here. And we're trying to see what we can do to bring this from like internal, underneath all our categories and expand it to all the AWS services that we have in the other SDKs as well. So we will put out an RFC for that probably in the coming weeks. So encourage all the customers to kind of take a look at that and give us their feedback.
Yeah.
Dylan, go ahead and if you want to like dive deeper into that.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think you did a great job explaining it. I think like Abdallah said as well, we just want anywhere Dart runs, we want to be there, and we want to be able to support whatever use case for AWS that customers have. So Amplify is great on the front end, and our libraries even work on the back end, which is cool. But we also want to expand support via the Dart SDK and via the Lambda runtime to make sure that wherever you want to run Dart and whatever AWS service you want to talk to, it's just really easy to do.
Nice. I quite like that. Like, I think there are some unofficial ways that you can get Dart into Lambda today that I've seen. Always pushing for one code base to rule them all, even though I know from experience that's never the way that things work out. But it would be nice if you're familiar with Dart that you could extend the backend as much as you can before needing to jump to another language to do something specific in your application.
It also probably speaks volumes to the language popularity as a whole, right? Like, we support a number of different languages through our SDKs and through our platforms and through Lambda. And, you can sort of correlate a trend. Like, if that language is gaining popularity and is having a bigger market share, then we're going to see that language become adopted and serviced as part of our SDKs and native runtimes. So,
I think
knowing that's upcoming is telling us something about what's going on, right?
Yeah, that's beautifully said. And that really speaks to how much we believe in the ecosystem for both Flutter and Dart. Like, that's exactly our thought process as well, Paul. That's exactly why we're investing so much in it.
Yeah, the adoption has been quite mind-blowing, actually, because I think middle of 2022, there were like 500,000 applications in the App Store for Flutter. And I think now they're like 1 million just within that 6-month period. So I think like it was announced in IO just yesterday or something like that. So I think that's been pretty encouraging in terms of adoption of the framework. And I think in terms of cross-platform, I think it's the clear winner right now.
Yeah. And like, Matt and I are working on a little side project, and we went through like evaluating what specific engine we wanted to use. And maybe, Matt, you want to talk a little bit about that, because we investigated a number of different like games engines, and we're seeing like games engines become available now for Dart and for Flutter. So
yeah, that's a good call out. Let me open up some stuff in my browser. I think I've got my screen share. I was kind of like, I was quietly thinking in the background, like, it's kind of insane bringing in Lambda support, right? Like, Lambda supports a lot of stuff out of the box, but I know there's community-driven projects around Swift, and some of them have contributors even within AWS internally. And I think Rust was probably the last one that moved from a community-driven project to something that we've actually got like official support within Lambda for. And so having Dart there too is kind of mind-blowing to me. It would be awesome. Paul and I have mucked around a lot with Flutter recently. We're building that reference app for Code Catalyst, as I mentioned. But we also built a really cool app for Sydney Summit. And this was an IoT app. We don't have the IoT device handy with us. It's probably somewhere in Paul's other sheds.
In the other room. If I had thought about it, I would have brought it out. But yeah.
Yeah, that's right. But this was like a really simple multi-platform app that we made for people in Sydney Summit. So we had it working on iOS, we had it working on macOS, we had it working on web. And it would basically send commands just through to a little M5 stack IoT device. Let me see if I can bring up a picture. So IoT M5 stack.
Yeah, I think it called a Lambda function, and the Lambda function put a message in a message queue and sent that back out. And so we had that interaction between it. But the interesting thing about this was that I've spent far less time than anyone on the call in using Flutter. And I was able to build this I swear it took me less time to build the app than it took Matt to style it, right? Like, Matt's got the visuals down, and he probably spent, 20 minutes, 15 minutes or something styling it up so make sure it looked all right. So it just goes to show that the language is really comfortable and easy to use. And getting it to work on more than one device, multiple devices, probably was just the longest period of time was waiting for that Android image to download to watch that, hot reload and build. And the experiences for me was great, because I'm like, I could code directly in Flutter, have hot reloading, do all my apps locally, and it worked, and we could cross compile it between the different devices. For that demo, we were using the web page for people, but yeah, it worked across all the devices. So, it's a great experience for anybody considering. I know earlier people have said that they are interested in learning Flutter, it's the next on their board. Get stuck into it. It's really good. I really like it.
Yeah, so let's go into something else really cool. We've only got a couple of minutes, but feel free to ask questions on the chat as well. But I'm really impressed with this little Flame engine, right? So Flame is basically using the rendering power of Flutter. It allows you to run different games on different platforms, and not only the rendering does it handle, but it also supports like different packages such as like physics that you might have in a game. You might have inputs received through like keyboard or mouse or joystick or touch. It does a lot with the rendering engine of Flutter itself, and then it also has been extended into other modules. Like people have made role-playing games with it, and they've got role-playing game engines that come off of it, like Bonfire. So this is like a really cool thing that you can use to kind of teach yourself Flutter. If you are interested in learning Flutter, you can actually make your own little game with it. And that's kind of what Paul and I had started. We were like, we want to make a game for DevShed. We wanted to be focused on being in our backyard and us doing something. And so we've started, and we'll probably like work on it right throughout the year and chip away at it. But similar to last year, we want to have like a multiplayer lawn mowing, points versing, point scoring multiplayer game. And so the idea would be that Paul would have his lawnmower on the screen. I'd be able to come into his game session with my lawnmower, and we can see who can mow the most lawn. And we were just making this as like a fun little game to show that you can actually use AWS as a backend with Amplify, Flutter, Flame being the game engine powering it. And we can actually have real-time networking happening between two different people that are playing across the world together, right? So, So this is my little cute little prototype that hopefully we'll get to extend, and we'll bring in the co-op functionality now that we have the features that we've been dying for in Amplify.
Yeah, because we do. Cool. Yeah. Yes. Sorry, I spoke over you, Ashish.
No, I think that looks really cool. Like I haven't ever built a game, but like that's pretty awesome, and looking forward to see what you'll do to kind of integrate Amplify into this.
We'll be Amplify and AppSync. It'll be similar to what we used last year. So that's kind of going to be the base of it, but we might have a scoring system where we're using Amplify to store stuff in Dynamo rather than directly on AppSync. We might have some stuff stored in S3 with all of our art resources. That way we can make the game file quite small, and then it downloads things the first time that you launch it, because usually have restrictions around app sizes. People download things in an app store. But yeah, it's really cool.
The idea is to get it out there that, we think about apps and frameworks and buttons and modules and logins as things that are like a shopping list like app, like when you mentally collect those things together. But we're using all of those features in like a game, and so it's the idea is more to correlate that the usage extends far outside of like those business-based applications or shopping list type applications or reward systems or something like that. That we're taking advantage of all this stuff that's going to make our ability to build a game much faster.
Excellent, and I think we're right on time, right? So. Maybe what we'll do is we'll wrap up. Is there any last questions from the audience? Feel free to pump them through. But Ashish, Abdallah, Dylan, anything you kind of want to say about all this exciting stuff that's happening in the Flutter space with Amplify?
I think one of the last things that I want to say is we are going to be putting out a public areas of focus document that we're going to be putting on our repo for Amplify Flutter to really make sure that the community understands what it is that we're building and working on. So stay tuned for that. We're going to be announcing that very, very soon.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to add one or two more things about Flutter in general for folks who are considering for cross-platform development. So the approach is very different from other frameworks in the past, in the sense for example, React Native on desktop, you need to have certain third-party libraries like async storage supported for those particular platforms first, and only then will you really be able to support persistence on those platforms. So many of those are fragmented in terms of how they land. It's still a pretty solid approach for mobile and web, but in terms of comparison to Flutter, once Flutter is fully supported on desktop, it kind of enables your app to just run there without having to do much. So that's a really powerful thing if you haven't worked with it yet. And the other real improvement over other alternatives is the upgrade experience is really smooth. So sometimes in the past, when I've upgraded a React Native app, you basically have to migrate your app to the new version of React Native, especially when it's like a major upgrade. So you basically move all your code over and then you keep trying to get it running. I don't have to do that too frequently, but it is very painful. In the case of Flutter, that's a much more seamless experience. And I think they really nailed that. So just a few points I wanted to point out there for folks considering Flutter.
And I think when I was working with Objective-C and Swift, we had the same thing. We always had a bit of a joke across the industry, I think, that whenever iOS, the next version dropped, or Google dropped the next version of Android, it was basically like upgrade week. So everyone in sprints would just align to, okay, we need to do all the little things to get the app running again, and then we need to release an update ASAP to the app stores. Right. So they've done really nicely there, and I think it's React Native is beautiful. I've delivered so much with it. I absolutely love it, but I also love Flutter as well. And Flutter's approach of like doing everything and controlling the UI seems to really work for the way that I like to work. Whereas React Native is really like, let's build on top with all these bridges to all these different native components that you can leverage and build your own kind of wrapper components for React Native and share around as well. Yeah. So both supported fully by Amplify, but yes, now we have both options there for however people work in the community, right?
Definitely. Absolutely. And very unbiased opinions of both me and Abdallah, because we support React Native on the JS team as well. So, exactly. Definitely there are trade-offs on both sides, but depends what you're looking for. So
cool. Well, thanks everyone for coming on, and thanks everyone in the chat for watching the stream. We'll wrap it up now. We'll hopefully do a few more sessions on Flutter, but expect a lot more content to come across from the different sources. It sounds like that zero to hero that people did want in the chat, there's going to be a lot of that that's going to satisfy that need coming up from all sides. So thank you very much, and we'll catch you on the next Devs in the Shed.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, team. And thanks all, audience. Bye.